learn today for Hinda Bracha Bas Yitzchak Gosher. There we go. So 46A1 art scroll left column. Amar Rebbe Elazar, Amar Rebbe Elazar Mishum Bar Kapara. So now Rameir had said that an additional pyre on top of the mizbech, on top of the altar, was made every single day. So there were 3 pyres on top of the mizbech every day. The big one, the little one for the ketiris, and a third one for the leftover avarim and chalovim, the limbs and the fats that were not consumed the previous night. Meaning, let's say today is Thursday, the kabbanis of Wednesday, whose sacrificial limbs had to be opened up and burnt up, and they weren't completely done. And once you started it by day on Wednesday night, you were allowed to continue it into Thursday night, which is, of course, it's Wednesday night by us, but by us, the night comes before the day. When you're allowed to continue it into Wednesday night, if by Thursday morning there was still leftovers, said Rameir, we took the leftovers and we put them on this third fire. So Amar Rebbe Elazar Mishum Bar Kapara, and again, stop me if I'm not making any sense. Amar Rebbe Elazar Mishum Bar Kapara. Aimel Haya Rameir. This is what Rameir was saying. Ivrei Oila Shenitaisu. The limbs of the Tamid Oila. That means we know we brought the Tamid twice a day, in the morning and in the afternoon. So the afternoon's Tamid, if some of its fats or some of its limbs were left over from the previous night, because in the afternoon, the previous afternoon, you shechted it, you offered it, and now its limbs needed to be brought up at night and burned. And if they were not completely burnt off the previous night, we make for them a third pyre, and arrange it upon it, even on Shabbos. So says the Gemara first. My kamashlam. What did he mean by the first words? He makes for them their own pyre and he arranges it on them. Says the Gemara, Tanino, what are you telling me that we didn't know beforehand? Our Mishnah says that straight out. That every day there were 4 pyres, of which Rameir said one of them was an extra one. There was the big one for the regular fats and limbs. There was a small one for the incest. There was a third one for extra fuel in case any of the first 2 pyres started dying down. And the third one and the fourth one was this one, an extra pyre for any leftovers from the day before. Amar Rebbe Oven, says Rebbe Oven, what Rabbi Elazar ben Mishum Bar Kapara was coming to say in the name of Rameir, that that you needed it only that fourth pyre to even for those parts, those limbs that in fact were invalid and were left over, because we have a rule, and this is an important rule, that anything that goes up onto the altar, once it goes up onto the altar, it doesn't come down. That means even for whatever reason, invalid limbs, invalid fats for whatever reason, that means even if it, let's say it got tameh, it got contaminated, but it ended up on top of the altar is machshir. The altar comes along and makes it good. So that's what it's coming to tell us. Like that you need the fourth pyre even for limbs that became invalid, because at the end of the day they ended up on top of the altar. That's good enough, and we can put them on the fourth pyre. So says the Gemara, but this is only if the fire is already taken hold of the invalid parts. Avuloi bashlam emar, but the fire had not yet taken hold of them. Loi, a special pyre is not set up for them at all. Okay, instead they are burnt on the regular big fire that is up there. So again, what we're talking about over here, the reason why Rabbi Elazar Mishum Bar Kapara essentially repeated what our Mishnah already told us about Rameir, about the additional fourth fire on top of the Mizbeach for the parts that had not been burnt up the night before, is because if some of those parts happen to be pisulin, invalid, okay, which means if they're invalid, they weren't even supposed to be up there. But because they got to the top of the base of the mizbeach, they got into the top of the altar's kedusha goes ahead and rectifies the mizbeach is machshir afilu psulin. The mizbeach is machshir, makes kosher even those things that are invalid. So much so, says Rameir, that even in that case, you can use the fourth pyre for the invalid limbs, but only, as Oven explains, only if the fire had already taken hold of them the night before. They just hadn't completely consumed them. If, for whatever reason, they were left on the side of the top of the Mizbeach and never entered into the fire at all overnight, then you can place them on the regular big pyre on top. Ikadi Amri, others say, Echad Kishirin, the Echad Pasulin, the leftovers, that means the leftover fats or sacrificial limbs, whether they're valid or invalid, Mashla Behema or in. If the fire the night before had taken hold of them, then we have a special fourth fire set up for them. The Eloi, but if not, no. Instead, they're burnt on the regular pyre. Okay? Now, Gemara says, the next words that he said was, Afilu b'Shabbos. Rabbi Elazar Mishum Bar Kapara said, leftovers, Oiselem Maroch b'Neyatz. We make for them their own separate pyre. We set it up for them. Afilu b'Shabbos, even on Shabbos. So now we're on 46A2. 46A2. Says the Gemara, Tanya, Tanina, but we already learned that in our Mishnah. What are you coming to teach me? V'hayoyim. But today, our Mishnah said, which is Yom Kippur. And what is Yom Kippur called? Yom Kippur is called the Shabbos, Shabbosain, the Shabbos of all Shabboses. And what do you see? V'hayoyim Chamesh. We have 5 pyres. 1 the regular, 2 for the regular incest, 3 for extra fuel, 4 for the leftovers from the night, from the day before, the leftovers from the fats and the sacrificial parts from the 9th day of Tishrei, and a 5th one for the extra ketairis that was brought into the Kodesh HaKadoshim, into the Holy of Holies on Yom Kippur. So you see that on Yom Kippur itself, the holiest day of the year, the Shabbos of all Shabboses, Shabbos Shabbosain, and we had a 4th pyre for the leftovers. So what are you coming to tell me, adding to tell me that even on Shabbos I'm allowed to put the leftovers that weren't fully consumed onto the pyre? We do need it. We need Bar Kapara to make that clear that even on a regular Shabbos you could do it. Why? Because otherwise I might think as follows. Sal kedad chamina hanimili heichadachal Yom Kippurim liyos acher Shabbos. I might think that the Mishnah is only talking about a Yom Kippur that falls out right after Shabbos. So Erev Yom Kippur is Shabbos, and Yom Kippur is Matzah Shabbos Sunday. The Chelvei Shabbos could even be Yom Kippur, which in that case, the fats of Shabbos are offered on the Mizbeach on Yom Kippur, meaning Matzah Shabbos, the nighttime afterwards, like every day, which happens to fall out in this case on Yom Kippur. Avo be'emsa Shabbos loy. But if Yom Kippur would fall out in the middle of the week, maybe we would not burn yesterday's fats and limbs on Yom Kippur because there was plenty of time after the afternoon of the previous day's carbon shalbeno abayim, coming of the afternoon. There was time for them to be consumed on the fire. You didn't need to get to the nighttime. Kamash Malon, that no, that even on Shabbos or even a weekday on Kippur, we do set up a new fire and burn yesterday's parts on it. Amarava, my high the kamche. Wait a minute. Well, who is this who doesn't care what he grinds? He didn't think about it. He left in all the schmutz, all the dirt. His thinking is off. The Mishnah says clearly, every day, b'chol yom, there was 4 pyres. What does every day mean in our Mishnah? Obviously, it means even a regular Shabbos. Every Shabbos is part of every day of the week. So what is Bar Kapara coming to teach me that I didn't know from our Mishnah? Says the Gemara, Kashi, you got a good question. You're right. Our Mishnah does say B'chol Yom, which means teaching is even on Shabbos. Give me 1 second. Even on Shabbos. So I don't need Bar Kapara to teach me this. To teach me that even Yom Kippur that falls on a regular week, because we have a rule for Chol Yom, all days. Our Mishnah says the Mishnah Kashi. You're right, it's a Kashi. Now, when the Mishnah says when the Gemara says the word Kashi, it's a question. It means that it has a way of getting out of this problem. It just doesn't really like the answer it's going to give. So it's not a complete refutation. It doesn't completely refute and leave Bar Kapara as a question, but because we could shoehorn in an answer, but the Gemara says, let's just leave it as a question. Now, says the Gemara, Pligi to Rav Huna. And in fact, Rav Huna is at variance to the opinion of Bar Kapara and Rav. The Yoma, because Rav Huna says, the beginning of the Shabbos Tamid, that means the Shabbos, the Tamid shall boiker. On Shabbos, the Tamid shall boiker. On Shabbos, the morning Tamid that you bring on Shabbos, its slaughter and the offering of its blood and its parts does override the Shabbos. But the Friday Tamid, that means the Friday afternoon carbon tamid, its burning of its sacrificial parts does not override the Shabbos. That means you do not go ahead and burn them on the Shabbos. We do not burn the Friday tamids on the Shabbos. We must place all this flame before the onset of the Shabbos. We have to put them on. There's plenty of time on Friday afternoon after the carbon shalben abayim, which takes place 6 hours and 30 minutes after the beginning of the day. There's still plenty of time, even on the short Fridays, to stick the sacrificial parts on the flame of the altar before Shabbos begins. So again, when it says soifai the end, it doesn't mean the end of Shabbos. It means the end of the Friday Tamid shall not be burnt. Its sacrificial parts should not be burnt on Friday night. Mashenken, of course, Shabbos' morning's Tamid, which the pasuk says b'moy adoi, in its time, which means that it always has to be done consistently in its time, in the morning and in the afternoon. The Tamid of the Shabbos obviously is brought completely. Says the Gemara, Gufa. So therefore, we see that Rav Huna holds that parts of the weekday Tamid are not burnt on the Shabbos. This is obviously in opposition of Bar Kapara and Rav, who holds that they are. Gufa. The text says, Amar Rav Huna, Tamidi Chilase Doicha. The beginning of the Tamid, i.e., the Shabbos morning Tamid, does override the halachas of Shabbos, and we do slaughter it and offer it up. But the end, i.e., the Friday afternoon, the Friday afternoon Tamid, its sacrificial parts are not offered up on Shabbos. My Einedoich. What does it mean? It does not override. Because, remember I said the word, b'moyadoi. Something has to be brought in its time. When it says b'moyadoi, the Gemara in other places says the following words. Afilu b'Shabbos, afilu b'tomei. When it has to be brought b'moyadoi in its time, it's brought even on Shabbos and even in a state of contamination. Okay? So for an example, the carbon Pesach is brought in its time, and it's brought even when it's all everybody's contaminated, because we say if everybody's contaminated, nobody is contaminated. Tumah is hutra b'tzibur. Tumah is allowed in the tzibur, or maybe not. We sometimes say tumah is duchya b'tzibur. The tumah is pushed off when it is a community. If the entire community is contaminated, we either say it's hutra, nobody's contaminated, or we say everybody remains contaminated, but because everybody remains contaminated, and still we have to bring the sacrifice, because the Torah says, b'moyadoi, in its time, therefore we push off the contamination. It's not that they're not contaminated. They will have to go to the mikvah. They will have to do whatever it is to get themselves purified. But for regards to the carbon, we push it off to bring the carbon. So the Gemara over here says, what are we talking about? So Rav Chisda says, Doicha Shabbos. It means to push off the Shabbos, meaning the burn. Now we're on 4683, meaning the burning of the parts override the laws of Shabbos. The Eina Doiches Satuma, but it does not override the laws of Tumah. So according to this, according to Rav Chisda, Rav Huda is saying that the Talmud sacrificial parts may not be burnt on the altar. That's in a case of Tumah, although we generally override the Tumah, the contaminated restrictions, for the sake of the Talmud, because it says b'moyadoi, the Talmud has to be brought in its own time. Afilu b'Shabbos, afilu b'tomei, so that even when everybody it's contaminated, you still bring the Talmud. That the mere burning of its parts are not significant enough to allow it. We allow you to bring it, to slaughter it. Yes, that you can do. That's pushed off, but not to actually offer it on top of the Mizbeach. Mashen Cain, on the other hand, the burning of the Talmud does override the Shabbos, restrictions. So that means if the parts of the Friday Talmud were not offered up on Friday afternoon, you're allowed to bring them, you're allowed to offer them up on Friday night, even though it's Shabbos, because Talmud has to be brought totally b'mayadoi, and there, regarding Shabbos, it's doiches HaShabbos. For Tumah, in other words, for Tumah, for Shabbos, we say that Shabbos, that it's doiches the Shabbos. For Tumah, we say it's only duchya b'tzibur. It's only pushed off in the tzibur. The tumah is not mutar. It doesn't go away when everybody is tummy. Nobody is tummy. When everybody is tummy, we say everybody remains tummy. But since I must bring the carbon because it says b'mayadai, I push off the tummy and allow myself to bring the carbon tummy. But that's all I do, because the tumah is still here, the contamination is still here, and therefore offering up the sacrificial parts afterwards, that I cannot do in a state of contamination. Rabba Omar, Rabba says no. Rav Huna means to say, Doiche Satuma, that in fact we do override the Tumah. That Tumah is Hutra B'tzibor. That the Tumah, if everybody's Tameh, nobody is Tameh. And if nobody is Tameh, well, nothing is Tameh. Therefore, I could bring the carbon, I could slaughter it, and I could offer up its sacrificial parts, even the Friday afternoon parts. The Eina Doicha is a Shabbos, but the end of the Friday Tameh does not override the laws of Shabbos. So even if there was parts of it that were not offered up on Friday afternoon, you're not allowed to offer it up on Friday night on the special pyre, only on the regular pyre. Says the Gemara. Amalei Abaye l'Rabba, says Abaye to Rabba, Lididi kashu l'Rav Chizda kashu. According to your opinion, there's a difficulty, and according to Rav Chizda, there's a difficulty. Lididach kashu. According to your opinion, there's a question, and essentially it goes both ways, as you're about to see. Ma'ishno tumah. Why is tumah different? That it overrides for the sake of the burning of the tumah, that tumah, that the doiches tumah, that you can be doiches the tumah, the ksiv b'moyadoi. Remember, it says, I said this before, it says in its time, in its appointed time. Meaning, afilu b'tumah, that means even if it's tameh, even if there's a case of contamination, it still needs to be brought. No Shabbos nami b'moyadoi afilu b'Shabbos. By Shabbos, it also says the words in its appointed time, which would mean that even on Shabbos. So then, why do you differentiate doiches atumah, the eina doiches Shabbos, that it pushes, overrides the Tumah, but it doesn't override the Shabbos. Both of them say b'moyadoi ula Rav Chizda kasha the other way. Ma'ishno Shabbos. What's the laws of Shabbos? Why is it different that you say that Shabbos overrides, but Tumah does not override? The Ksiv says by Shabbos b'moyadoi afilu b'Shabbos. No Tumah nami b'moyadoi afilu b'Tumah. So how could you make a differentiation between Shabbos and Tumah either way? So says the Gemara Amalei. So Rabbi says to Abaye, Loyla the kasha, not to me is it a question, but Loyla Rav Chizda kasha, and not to Rav Chizda is it a question. Lididi to me, Loy kasha, it's not a question. Soiba is sichi losai, because I hold that it's regard to overriding the law. The end of the Talmud is like the beginning. We're now on Amid Beis 46b1. Okay, what am I talking about? So when I say like this, in my opinion, the end is like the beginning. What do I mean? Tumah, with regard to things being tumah, contaminated, chilosai bar mitcha tumu. Since the beginning of the Tameh, the offering of its blood on the Mizbeach is fit to override the laws of Tumah, because if there is, in the event where there is no Kohen, if there's no Kohen that is turned, look at the top Rashi. Matechilosai bar mitchi tumahu, just like the beginning, the offering of the Tameh at the beginning is doicha, overrides the tumah. In a case in ein koyin tar l'zarek damai, if there is no koyin that is pure, that is tar to throw it, all the kahanim atamei. Okay, if all the kahanim atamei, we say none of the kahanim atamei. Let him throw it, right? Saifai nami tidaki. In that case, I'm saying that Tumah is hutra b'tzibur. The Tameh is mutter in the tzibur, where all the kahanim are Tameh, nobody is Tameh. Well, if they're not Tameh with regard to throwing the blood, they're not Tameh from offering up the sacrificial parts onto the altar. So therefore, even the Friday afternoon Tameh, its parts can be offered on top of the altar, onto the special flame on the altar. And I am. But since, okay, now, That has to do with Tomei. Shabbos, but with regard to Shabbos, I hold. Techila says, Rabba, I hold. I hold at the beginning, i.e., the Friday afternoon, Tamid. Its slaughter and the throwing of the blood is not fit to override the Shabbos. It's not fit to override. We say you could push off the Shabbos with regard to offering it off. The Friday one you had more than enough time in the afternoon to put its sacrificial parts onto the top of the Mizbeach. The fact that you didn't is not going to allow, according to me, for you to override the Shabbos. I say the same thing, that the burning of the parts will also not override the Shabbos. And in fact, that's what we say. Okay, so in other words, what we're saying like this, with regard to the Friday afternoon Tamid, look, you have to slaughter by 6.5 hours on Friday afternoon. If you blow it, I'm not allowing you to do it on if Shabbos comes in early at 7.5 hours, 8 hours. You can't do it. And if you slaughtered it on time, but you didn't throw its blood on time before Shabbos arrived, you blew it. Therefore, I'm not allowing you to bring up its sacrificial parts on Friday after and Friday either. You had plenty of time on Friday to do it. That's according to Rabba. According to Rav Chisda, like Kasha, he goes, for he does not hold at the end of the Tamid, meaning Friday afternoon, is like the beginning, like Shabbos morning. Therefore, he doesn't have to say that the end of the Tamid to override the Tumah restrictions on the strength of this. He says like this: Shabbos, the Hutruhu b'tzibor, the Shabbos restrictions that become mutter b'tzibor, because it says b'moyadoi afilu b'Shabbos. So therefore, it's permitted. Once you're permitted. Period. You're permitted. That means even the Friday afternoon fasting sacrificial parts are allowed to be offered up on Shabbos evening, on Friday night, onto the Mizbeach. Tomo is only duchyahu b'tzibor, is only pushed off in the tzibor. I'm allowed to bring the Tamid, slaughter the Tamid, because it says b'mayadoi in its time, so I have no choice when this comes, so I push it off. But the reality is the Tumah is still there, and everybody over there still has to go to the mikvah and retire themselves. Therefore, since the beginning of the Tumah is the primary source of its atonement, its slaughter and the throwing of its blood onto the Mizbeach is the primary. There, I will say, with regard to Tumah, okay, I have no choice. That's the B'mayadoi. I must do it. But the end of the tummy, i.e., the burning of its parts, and from here it's mashma, not just the Friday afternoon parts, but even the Shabbos day parts are not to be offered up onto the Mizbeach on Shabbos, because that's already after the kapara. Let's finish up to the end of the parak. Itmar, it says, one who extinguishes the fire of the incense of the Torah's shovel, or that means the coals that are on in the shovel, or the menorah, he's liable for lashes. He's got to get malchus. Obviously, he did this by accident. He did this, what he called, he did it with knowledge. He did this obviously with knowledge. Says Abai is chayiv for lashes, because it says you're not allowed to extinguish. Rav Amar Potter. The Gemara explains. The chivish b'rosh hamizbeach, if he extinguished the coals of the shovel on top of the mizbeach, kulam aloi pligi zechayiv. Everybody agrees he's liable. When he took the shovel down to the ground and he extinguished it there, he's chayiv, even though he took it down from the altar. The coals are still considered the fire of the altar. And since the fire of the altar is not allowed to be extinguished, what he called is chayiv. Since Robert says he's not liable, since once he took the coals off the altar, it's removed. Once it's removed, it's removed. It loses its name of fire of the altar. Ella says the Gemara, Ella Rav Nachman, Rabba Baravua. This is Rav Nachman said in the name of Rabba Baravua, Hamoirin Gacheles Al Gabi HaMizbeach V'Chiva Chayiv. If one takes down a coal from on top of the Mizbeach, from the altar, and extinguishes it, he's liable. Kiman, who's he saying this like? Ke'abaya. It's like abaya. But that can't be. Give me a second. Okay? Because the halacha always, if the halacha, because here's the problem. We all know the halacha is always like Rava, not like Rav Nachman. So therefore, what are you saying? That Rav Nachman seems to be saying, Hamoyri Gacheles, if you take down a coal from on top of the Mizbeach, so now it's on the ground, the chibes, and you extinguish it, chayiv. Why are you chayiv? Because you're extinguishing, it seems, a fire of the altar, a shamizbeach. That's Abaya's svara. Rav Nachman can never be talking about Abaya because Rav Nachman always passes like Rava, like we all do, except in the 5-6 cases, the Yalkagam cases, which we bang into infrequently throughout Shas, the 5 cases that we hold like Abaya. So what's going on here? So now we're getting to the end. Mem 12 on the base, 46b2. Afilu tema kirava. We could say that it even accords with Rava. Okay, the case that Rav Nachman is talking about is different than the case of Rava and Abaya. Wholesome in the case of Rav Nachman, lo inkal mitzvasa. The coal that was not removed for his assigned purpose. In other words, the guy, for whatever reason, blinked out and he forgot the halacha that you're not allowed to take stuff off the top of the altar. And you're not allowed to extinguish it. So he took the coal down and he made a l'shem yichud. I'm doing this for, it remains a fire of the Mizbeach. And then he lashes it ice. Over there, everybody would agree, even Rava. But this has got nothing to do with Rava. Rav Nachman says in such a case, of course, you're chayiv, because in your mind, it was still a fire of the Mizbeach. In the case of Rava, in Sika the mitzvasa, the coal was removed for its assigned purpose. So in other words, when he took it down, he said, I'm taking it down, it's no longer a fire of the Mizbeach. I need the coal down on the bottom, I don't want to use it for the Mizbeach. By doing that, by having an hesiach das, if you consciously change its use, it loses its name of a fire of the Mizbeach and takes on a whole new designation. It takes on a whole new designation. No longer is it a fire of the Mizbeach, says Rabbi Yepotter. Ikadiyamri, another way of explaining it, if one took the coal down to the ground and extinguished it, the kula amaloi pligi the potter. This version says both Abai and Rava would say it's potter, because by taking it down, it's an umdana de milsa. It is an assumption that is made that by taking it down, you're taking it down for nefarious purposes, for not fire of the Mizbeach purposes. That's why you took it down. If it was a fire of the Mizbeach, you would have left it on the Mizbeach. By taking it down, your very actions are an umdana. Therefore, it no longer has the name of the fire of the Mizbeach, and you're potter. Ki pligi, where they argue with the Chabib Mizbeach, where he removed the coal from the pyre. He lifted it off the pyre, but he's still standing on top of the Mizbeach and he extinguishes it. Abaya says you never left the top of the Mizbeach. All you did was remove the coal from the fire itself, from the pyre. But nonetheless, it's there on top of the Mizbeach, so it's still a Mizbeach and Yechayiv. You're potter because once you removed it from the pyre, you're said, why would you remove a coal from the pyre? The answer is because you're using it for something else. So it's, even though you're on top of the Mizbeach, it's enough of an to know that the name, its purpose changed, its designation changed, and you're potter. So says the Gemara, but what do we do with this from Nachman Amar Rabba Bua that says that if one takes a coal down from the altar and extinguishes it, he's chayiv. Command like Abaye like Rava. He's not like Abaye or Rava. Both Abaye and Rava said that if you take it off the mizbech and you take it down the ramp and it's on the ground, that you potter, according to the second version. The Asya Ara, the Chibo, that if you took it down and you extinguish it, Kula Amalai Pligi the potter. Everybody agrees that you're potter. How can Rav Nachman say you're chayiv? It's like the Gemara, the same answer. Rav Nachman is talking about when you took down a coal and you didn't remove it from its purpose. You verbally or mentally say, it's remaining a fire of the Mizbeach, a fire of the altar, but for some reason you got a brain freeze and you decided to take it off the Mizbeach and extinguish it. Since you clearly made it clear that you're not changing its purpose and designation, it remains a fire of the Mizbeach, and you're chayav for extinguishing it, even though you extinguished it on the floor of the Mizbeach, of the floor of the Beis Hamikdash, not on the Mizbeach. Hacha, here, there is insik the mitzvah, but here, Rabbi and Rabba, when you take it off the fire and you bring it down off the Mizbeach, you're talking where you changed its purpose. You changed its purpose, it changes its designation. It's no longer, Charlie, you lost me? Or you're still there?
I'm here.
You're still there. You're still there, okay. And you're still over here. Over here, you changed its designation clearly, or you said nothing, and just by your actions, it sure looks that way. We assume it's in a different assignment. You changed its purpose, and therefore it has a different designation, and you remain potter. Hadana Allah Torah bekalpi. Hadana Allah Torah bekalpi. Hadana Allah Torah bekalpi. We return to you Torah bekalpi. We return to you Torah bekalpi. We return to you Torah bekalpi. Guys, Baruch Hashem, we finished. Tomorrow, please remember to bring Volume 2.